The door to the roadside bar creaked open, letting in a narrow beam of dying sunlight that cut through the smoke and dust. Conversations froze for a heartbeat as a small figure stepped inside. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, her frame swallowed by a leather jacket far too large for her, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Muddy sneakers, torn jeans, a ponytail that looked more like defiance than style. Every head turned, every glass paused midair. The laughter came next, first uncertain, then louder. A few men leaned back in their chairs, trading smirks. The Iron Wolves, a feared biker club whose name carried more weight than most men could bear, had never seen someone like her walk through their doors. The biggest of them, a barrel-chested brute called Tank, barked out a laugh that shook the bar. "What's this? A lost Girl Scout?" The room erupted again. Boots stomped. Bottles clinked. But through the jeers and the smoke, the girl didn't flinch. She stood her ground, breathing slow, waiting for the noise to die. When it finally did, they noticed something on her back, a faded patch stitched onto the worn leather. The laughter fell silent, one voice at a time. Iron Wolves, founding member. The air shifted instantly. Men who'd been laughing moments ago now sat rigid, exchanging uneasy glances. That patch wasn't something you bought. It was something earned, and it belonged to legends long gone. The girl turned around, her eyes scanning their faces, voice trembling but steady. "This jacket belonged to my dad," she said quietly. "Eli Rivers." A ripple passed through the room like a shockwave. Eli Rivers. The name was history to these men, a name they'd once spoken with respect. He'd been one of the original wolves, a rider with a heart of fire and the kind of courage that couldn't be taught. He'd died years ago, saving strangers from a burning car on Route 66. None of them had seen his daughter since the funeral. And now, there she was, standing in the jacket of a legend, in the den of men who once called her father brother. Chapter 2. Her name was Mara. She didn't come to reminisce or stir ghosts of the past. She came because she was out of options. Her mother's health was failing, the bills stacking like walls she couldn't climb. No one in town would help, no one remembered the man who'd given his life for others. But Mara did. And she remembered what her mother used to say, "Your father's brothers would never let us fall." The words carried her here. As she stood before the wolves, they saw more than a girl. They saw the reflection of their own broken promises. Tank, who had laughed first, was now staring at his boots, his laughter gone, his jaw tight. "Kid," he muttered, standing slowly, "you shouldn't have had to come here alone." Around him, rough men began to shift uncomfortably, their eyes softening as guilt seeped in. Eli Rivers hadn't just been another rider. He'd been the backbone of the Iron Wolves, the kind of man who led by doing, who made even outlaws remember what loyalty meant. When he died, something inside the club died too. The rides became fewer, the brotherhood quieter. The world moved on, and with it, their promise to his family faded into the dust. But now, Eli's daughter stood among them, wearing his jacket, his patch, his courage. Tank took off his cap, rubbed a hand over his face, and nodded once. No more words were needed. Every man in that room understood what came next. That night, the roar of engines echoed across the hills as the wolves rode behind her. Headlights cut through the darkness like fire through fog. They followed Mara home, a convoy of thunder and redemption. Chapter 3. By morning, the entire town knew. The Iron Wolves were back. Not as outlaws, not as rebels, but as something greater. They worked from dawn until the streetlights came on, fixing fences, painting walls, repairing the roof that had caved in years ago. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as bikers carried groceries and laughed like men who just rediscovered purpose. For the first time in years, Mara's mother smiled. The same men who once swore allegiance only to each other now worked in silence for the daughter of the brother they'd lost. It wasn't charity. It was redemption. Tank supervised the work, barking orders the way he used to, while others took turns restoring the old motorcycle that had been left to rust in the shed, Eli's bike. By sunset, the engine roared to life again, smooth and low, like the heartbeat of a memory reborn. Mara stood beside it, eyes wide, tears shining. They handed her the keys. "He'd want you to ride," Tank said. She nodded, her hands trembling as she gripped the handlebars. That night, under the orange wash of streetlights, she rode through town with the wolves at her back. It wasn't just noise. It was a promise kept, and as their engines thundered through the night, the people of the town began to see them differently, not as the iron wolves of old, but as protectors, men reclaiming the best of who they'd been. They began charity rides again, delivering food, raising money for veterans, visiting hospitals, always wearing their patches proudly, always remembering Eli. And at the front of every ride was Mara, the little wolf, carrying her father's name into every sunrise. Chapter 4. Months later, the wolves gathered for their annual meet, a time for stories, laughter, and remembrance. The air was heavy with nostalgia, the scent of fuel and firewood mingling under the stars. In the center of it all stood Mara, wearing her father's jacket. Tank approached her, holding something wrapped in cloth. His voice was rough but gentle. "We got something for you, kid." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a new patch, custom-made. The words were simple but carried weight heavier than steel. "Legacy Rider," it read. And below, stitched in smaller letters, "Daughter of Eli Rivers." The crowd fell silent. No one spoke as Mara kneeled, sewing the patch beside her father's original one. When she stood, her smile was small but steady. "Dad used to say," she whispered, "the patch doesn't make you strong. It reminds you who you ride for." The words hung in the air like smoke, soft and eternal. Around her, the wolves bowed their heads. Some cried openly. Others just stared at the ground, remembering who they used to be, and who they'd become again. From that day forward, wherever the iron wolves rode, people recognized the young girl among them, her father's ghost in her eyes, his courage in her heart. The towns they passed through waved not out of fear, but gratitude. She wasn't just carrying his legacy. She was expanding it. And as the engines roared across the endless highway, sunlight flashing off the twin patches on her jacket, everyone who saw her understood what those riders had finally remembered. Kindness, like loyalty, never dies. It just waits for the right person to ride it home. Weeks passed, and what began as a single act of loyalty turned into something far greater. The Iron Wolves, once feared and forgotten, became a force of quiet good across the county. Their rides no longer ended in bars or backroad showdowns. They ended at children's hospitals, food banks, and shelters. Wherever someone was struggling, the wolves appeared, engines rumbling like thunder rolling in before a storm. And at the front of every convoy rode Mara, her father's jacket glinting in the sunlight, the twin patches, founding member and legacy rider, catching every eye that saw her. People called her the Little Wolf, though there was nothing little about her spirit. She had become a symbol of something the world had forgotten: honor, loyalty, and kindness that didn't need words. She rode with her chin high, her eyes steady on the horizon, her father's old bike now running smoother than ever, rebuilt by the same hands that once held guns, wrenches, and grudges. One morning, a call came from the next town over. A veteran had lost his home to a fire. Before the man even asked, the wolves were already riding. Mara led them through the early dawn mist, the convoy stretching for miles behind her. Tank followed, pride in his eyes as he watched her guide the men who had once guided him. When they arrived, they found the veteran sitting on the curb beside what was left of his house, smoke curling into the cold air. He looked up, confusion mixing with disbelief as the roar of engines filled the street. Without hesitation, the men dismounted, started hauling supplies, setting up tents, and passing out food. Mara crouched beside the man, her voice calm and warm. "We can't bring back what you lost," she said, "but we can make sure you're not alone." The man nodded, tears forming in his eyes as he looked at the emblem on her jacket. "Eli Rivers' girl?" he whispered. She smiled softly. "Yeah. He taught me to ride." By nightfall, the wolves had rebuilt what they could and left behind more than just materials: they left hope. As they rode back, the sky burned orange with sunset, and Tank pulled up beside Mara. "Your old man would have been proud," he said over the roar of the wind. Mara turned to him, eyes steady. "I know," she replied. "But I think he'd be prouder of you." Tank chuckled, then fell silent, the words hitting deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, he felt peace instead of regret. The pack had found its heart again. When they returned to the bar that night, the same bar where it all began, the laughter was different. It wasn't cruel or empty. It was the sound of a family reborn. On the wall above the bar hung Eli's photo, freshly framed, a candle burning beneath it. Someone had written in chalk beside it, "Once a wolf, always a wolf." Mara sat quietly in the corner, sipping a soda while the men told stories about her father, about the road, about the days they thought they'd lost forever. And as she listened, she realized something her father had always known: brotherhood isn't about who rides the fastest or fights the hardest. It's about who shows up when it matters most. That night, as the last light faded and the wolves rode out once more, Mara's shadow stretched long across the highway, merging with her father's in the moonlight. The legacy wasn't just his anymore, it was theirs. And somewhere in the wind that rushed past her helmet, she could almost hear his voice. "Ride steady, little wolf. The road's yours now." The seasons changed, and so did the legend of the Iron Wolves. What began as a return to loyalty became something the whole county talked about. People no longer crossed the street when the wolves rolled by, they waved. Kids pointed at the chrome and thunder, not in fear but in awe. The same men who once rode for pride now rode for purpose, their black jackets carrying stories of redemption stitched in every thread. And at the center of it all was Mara Rivers, the girl who had walked into a bar alone and walked out leading a brotherhood. Word spread fast. News stations, local papers, even strangers on social media shared photos of the wolves rebuilding homes, hosting charity rides, and escorting funeral processions for veterans who had no family left. The once feared symbol of the Iron Wolves had transformed into a banner of honor. Mara's quiet courage had changed everything. She never gave speeches or sought credit. She simply showed up, helmet on, eyes forward, carrying her father's legacy like a torch no storm could put out. When people called her a hero, she always shook her head. "I'm just riding his road," she would say. Then came the anniversary ride, the biggest event the Wolves had ever held. Hundreds gathered along Route 66, the same highway where Eli Rivers had taken his last breath. The air was thick with the scent of fuel and memory. Mara stood before them, leather jacket gleaming in the rising sun, both patches stitched proudly side by side. Tank approached, his voice low but firm. "You ready, kid?" She smiled. "Always." Engines roared to life one by one until the sound became a living heartbeat echoing across the desert. At the front of the pack, Mara kicked her father's restored bike into gear and led them down the long stretch of highway. The wind whipped through her hair, the horizon endless before her. Every mile they rode was a tribute, not to rebellion but to redemption. When they reached the curve where Eli had died saving that family, the wolves slowed. The convoy came to a silent halt, engines idling like whispers. Mara dismounted, walked to the roadside, and placed a single white lily on the weathered memorial stone that bore her father's name. She stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, listening to the wind. In it, she heard echoes of the past, the laughter of her father, the rumble of old rides, the quiet pride of the man who had taught her that strength wasn't about noise, but about heart. When she opened her eyes, the sun had risen higher, gilding the road in gold. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You can rest now, Dad. We've got it from here." Behind her, 100 riders removed their helmets in silent respect. The sound of the engines faded into stillness, broken only by the soft cry of the wind across the asphalt. In that moment, every man understood what the Iron Wolves truly stood for. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't power. It was loyalty, love, and the kind of courage that rides quietly but leaves tracks forever. As Mara swung back onto her bike and the wolves roared to life again, the townspeople who watched from the roadside saw something more than a convoy. They saw a legacy, alive, unbroken, unstoppable. The girl who had once come seeking help now led an army of second chances. And as the sun set behind them, the twin patches on her jacket caught the fading light, founding member and legacy rider, shining together like past and future stitched into one. The iron wolves rode on, their thunder fading into the horizon. But the story of the girl who carried her father's name, who turned grief into purpose and silence into strength, would be told for generations. Because some legacies aren't inherited, they're earned. And Mara Rivers, the little wolf, had earned hers on the open road.